Have you ever made a friend mad because you're running late, but also you have a little bit of a snowstorm going on, so you're driving slow so you don't go in the ditch?
I can't say that I have.
My good friend mechanic Larry. Larry is helping us on this 50/20 project. Now, just to kind of recap a little bit, we bought this tractor last summer on an online auction. Had to get it out of the auction onto the little boy here. Then we had to get through fall. And then right around then in November, we started working on it. And we found out the motor had rusty cylinders and the morale in the shop went down with it. But then we bought a motor on Marketplace. And now we're at this point where we're throwing the new motor in. In the last video, we tore this hydraulic pump down. And the goal, and in that video, Larry talks about an 80/20 rate.
What's usually the ratio of good to bad? Is it like 1 in 10 or?
Repairables is probably maybe 20% are not repairable, 80% usually.
About 80% of the pumps that he goes through are rebuildable and 20% are not rebuildable. The only thing is, I think my ratio with him is like 50/50.
Yeah, you're like, I'm always in the
60/40. Yeah, probably about 60% of the pumps I brought him have not been rebuildable. And what you know, the one I brought him off this 50/20, not rebuildable.
You do have a little problem with these.
Okay, I'll bite. What's the problem?
Just a second, I'll show you in a second.
Like, is this the type of problem that costs money?
Yeah.
Oh, I knew I wasn't getting out of this unscathed.
So you had another pump laying around. What's the cost difference if you had to just replace this pump? I'm assuming you look for a used one, but what's the difference in cost?
Yeah, they're kind of all over the place. Okay, and this is where you kind of this is what's really nice working with an old veteran mechanic who's done this stuff a bunch, because he can kind of warn you of the pitfalls. When you go to John Deere, I think that day in the last video, we actually looked up the price. I think it was right around like...
You're dealing with 4115.85 with core 3865.85.
4,200, and then with the core it was 3,800. So they give you a little break.
Wow, that's a 4,200. That's a lot.
That's not exactly pocket change, right? So then you can go down the reman route. The reman route through kind of some well-known parts places was right around that 1,400. And so not terrible, right? Not terrible. You can find some new ones on the internet that are brand new, and they're right around that 1,800 to maybe 1,500, and they'll say they're brand new. The only downside is Larry's put a number of these in, they haven't held up. And so that's where it's nice working with an old veteran mechanic, someone who sees this stuff. He can kind of warn you of some of these pitfalls. Even like Larry's take was, hey, let's go with one of these other reman ones. I've dealt with them, a couple different companies that he's worked with. And so that's what we were kind of going down that route, but then also we kind of had, because I got some stuff laying around. We have one laying under the shelves. And once you know it, Adam took that over to his house and he was able to salvage some of the parts out of that. Basically what we were able to do, we were able to take some of the good parts out of pump number 1 and some of the good parts out of pump number 2 and then put them together. And that's actually what we're doing here in this video right here. We're reassembling the second pump with both components and trying to make one good working pump out of it.
I just came from John Deere, picked up the box of parts that Larry had actually ordered for this hydraulic pump, and now I'm headed over to Larry's because our goal is to take the two pumps, put them together, make one good working pump out of the two. My goal with this video and my goal with this portion of the project is that we're able to film it while I'm looking over Larry's shoulder and he's explaining what he's doing. So for anyone that's going to be tearing this pump down or tearing a pump down like this in the future, hopefully the 40-year vet can just warn you from a few of the pitfalls that he's seen in the past. That's my goal. We'll see how it all goes. I'm headed to Larry's right now. We got blasted with a snowstorm. If you can't see the snow behind me, I'm doing 30 to 35 miles an hour down a road on the way to Larry's house. And so I figured now is as good a time as any to pull over and kind of explain what we're doing. I'm headed there. We'll see how this all goes.
How bad was it?
Oh, you know I don't want to see prices. There's no replacement for experience, right? And let's face it, the generation that pulled these apart on a regular basis are less and less in the workplace. That's why we're grateful for you. Thank you, Larry. But just saying, it's not commonplace for a lot of farmers or a lot of people to pull, or the hobbyists to pull a hydraulic pump apart and go through it. And then there's just even myself. Yes, I've put seals in. Yes, I've put O-rings in. But I'm still watching you do all this. Just go, man, you make this look too smooth.
All right, so you were heading to Larry's house with a hydraulic pump?
Yep.
For those who aren't as familiar, what does a hydraulic pump do?
Okay, so the hydraulic pump sits on the front of the motor, and it basically, the motor spins this pump and spins, does it do?
You've never had to explain this before. What are the hydraulics used for on a tractor?
The pump actually does is it takes liquid fluid and then compresses it, so then you can turn that fluid into like using your steering or your brakes. All of that on a tractor, no different than power steering on a car. All of that is ran by fluid. In this case, it's hydraulic oil. But then what it'll also do is it'll lift either like a planter or a digger pulling up out of the ground. It just naturally just pushes hydraulic oil out to the cylinders, and it'll just go up or down. So it actually is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, if you ever lose your steering, oh, you'll know it.
We are back in Larry's garage, and we got to talk a little bit about what happens. Last week I bought you a pump. We originally thought it was good. The only red flag that we've seen is this screw here was turned too far to the pump, which was usually an indication that they're trying to get more pressure out of it, which can lead to it being wore out. Well then, like always, we find out the pump is junk. That's normal in my world, isn't it?
Yep.
Like I just don't have that luck of always throw it together. So fitting, pump out of the 5020 with the Detroit, pump's junk, but I knew back at home we had at least 2 pumps laying around. One was easy to get to, the other was not, because the other's still in that half a tractor from Wisconsin. So that same night, because you don't turn your phone off all the time, I was texting Larry like, hey, can I bring you this pump? Earlier today, me and the mechanic Larry found out our piston pump is junk, our hydraulic pump is junk. So Adam is actually running over another one that we had here to see if it's salvageable. The funny thing about this, Larry doesn't know yet it's showing up because he hasn't replied to my phone call or text. Adam's got nothing to do. And Adam showed up here about what, 8 o'clock with another pump. Next day, Larry tears into it. Actually, it turned out to be pretty decent, right? What was the problem with the second pump?
It turned over really easy, or easier than normal. So I think what it is, these springs, they get, you know, they get worn.
Yep.
And they just didn't have the compression that they should.
Basically, the first pump, the main shaft and piston was still, or crank was good.
That was all good. Yep.
Where on the second one, the second pump had a good housing, but there was a little bit of wear actually on the cam profile itself of the
Yes,
pump.
exactly.
But you were able, because one was a 20 series and the other's a 30s series, we were able to put them 2 together and make one.
The pump shaft number were the same part numbers, pump housing number were the same part numbers. So everything matched up there. We're good.
Okay, if you're a farmer and you got like the 4020 or the 4430 and you know it's chattering, you know it needs to get rebuilt, and you're trying to attempt this on by yourself, and you know Farmer Bob takes it, throws it up on the shop bench. What are like just the real quick pointers that you would always tell anyone that's going to do this just to look out for?
Once you start pulling pistons out, see what they look like if they're scored up in the housing. And if a pump gets a lot of metal through it, that's when you'll see your pistons will be all scored up. And I think we had a couple of years that grenaded. I mean, there was nothing left of them on the 50 series. You know, obviously these, once you take the big plugs out, you grab a hold of, I grab a pliers and just grab a hold of them and make sure they don't fall out of the housing like that pump did.
That's the number one, like if those come out, that's your number one red flag.
Then the pump is,
Gotcha.
The housing is junk, so.
Because one of the harder things to actually tell what's good and what's not good, it's not exterior. This is all the problems are going to be interior, so everything's still shiny. It's not like rust. Like semis, a lot of times you'll see rust rings, things like that, and you know that's a red flag. Here, like you were showing us the pitting on the shaft, basically any pitting on a surface, anything like that.
This you won't see until you disassemble, take the cam ring off, take the bearing off, and that's when you'll see this.
Just do that visual inspection.
Yep, that's the only way you can see it. And some guys wouldn't pull that apart if you look. If the seal surface here looks good, you can reuse the shaft. If this is good.
Gotcha.
So typically,
just pay attention to that.
When you first pull the shaft out, first thing you look at is here. This is where that quad ring I was talking about.
Yep, the one that was fighting you.
Yep, that's where that one actually rides, is right there.
Gotcha.
And if this is nice and smooth, which this one is, this would have been okay. But this is where we're not. Where we've got the flaking away on the shaft. So that's why this shaft would have to be replaced. But if you would just physically look at the shaft when you got it out with the cam and everything in place, oh yeah, this shaft looks good, we can reuse it. You still need to pull this bearing off so that you can see with the cam ring how much wears on your shaft. That's called a crankcase outlet valve. This is stroke control valve.
Throughout the first video on teardown and this second video here where we reman the second pump or put the second pump together, you're gonna hear the term stroke and stroke control valve a lot. And I wanna just take a minute and kind of explain it. Larry starts talking here a little bit about it, but I think I can also give a real life example of how it might help you out down the road. Last year when I started planting, I noticed I didn't have the vacuum flow on my vacuum planter like I thought I should. It just didn't seem like the hydraulics were responding. And so I called Larry. Larry's like, hey, de-stroke the pump. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Now, I have done this before. I have done this literally on job sites, but it's one of those things when you don't do it every day, you kind of forget about it just a little bit. All right, on the very fronts of these pumps, there is what they call the stroke control valve. And what's deceiving about that, when they first came from John Deere, they're just a cap. There's no valve. And it gets tough trying to figure out, well, there's a valve, there's this, there's that. But actually, when you look at a lot of them, when you pull the side shields down and you're looking at the hydraulic pump there, you're gonna see literally just a cap. And actually, the 4850 I was running that day was just a cap. It hadn't been updated to the turnstile valve that we're gonna be putting in this one.
This is the manual de-stroking screw that goes into the main pump. You take this plug out and put this in place.
So this is the plug. The plug from the factory is just a regular plug.
Yes, it would be. I'm just getting this assembled, and this will get threaded into there.
Gotcha.
But I always assemble this first.
Talking with Larry about a little bit last spring about it. Hey, it's got the cap, and he's like, try a couple other things first. Go back to the basics, start reading pressure. Now, before we can do that, what we're gonna do real quick is touch on how you read pressure. Modern equipment has electric sensors that usually will read pressure in real time. The old way of doing it is you actually hook a pressure gauge up to either like the SCV or what they call a diagnostic port or a DR. Okay, so I start reading pressure, boom, right off of the pump, right at the pump at the pressure control valve. I had 2450, 2400, right where I should be. Immediately I knew the pump was making proper pressure. Then I went back to the SCVs, and the SCVs actually, in this case, said 2400 too, but in our example that we're gonna use right now, we're gonna say that that was only like 16, 17, maybe 1800 PSI at the rear SCVs. All right, what you would do is you go up to the tractor and you'd have to unscrew the cap that is actually in the port that we need to put this. What part number is the actual?
Used to be AR36, A36, but now they changed it. It's all 7 items. They order individual
Oh, really?
parts. Yep.
Okay.
Used to be one part number. Now it's all sub to several parts.
You actually got to drive the cotter pit. Hey, I'm just grateful we can still get these parts.
Yeah, it's
A changing world, right? Mm-hmm. But the advantage of that little guy right there can save you a lot of time. If
down the road, if your pump kicks out, decides not to pump, it thinks that there's no demand. That little screw goes against, this is called the stroke control valve. And this goes against this. Once it's assembled in the pump, it'll be like this. And when there's a demand for oil, it opens up. When there's no demand, it closes. So sometimes these will stick in the closed position, and it won't pump. So then you have your manual de-stroking screw that you can thread in and pushes on the tip of the valve to open up the valve. And if you can see into here, that's the tip of that valve.
Yep.
See as it's pushing it off the seat?
Yep.
And that's when you're de-stroking the main pump. If that valve sticks, it can't tell the pump to pump. So when you manually de-stroke, this is what you're doing. You're shutting the pump off manually.
Yeah.
So he backs it out all the way. So that's
Crazy.
and basically all you're doing is you're pulling this valve, you're pushing this valve off of its seat. Because if it sticks in this position, it's not going to pump.
And that just flushes it all with oil.
Mm-hmm.
to get it to flush. Usually it gets a little crap on the seat. So these I typically replace when you rebuild a pump.
Just put them in.
Yep, just put them in.
Because it is not the nicest location on a tractor.
No, once it's on the tractor, it's tough.
It's not easy.
So this will be totally assembled. We'll get this all back together, and then we'll start working on the main pump.
And our new pump that we're assembling, Larry's actually going through and putting together the stroke control valve. And that's what we're kind of pick up here. If you need to do this, because you only have 1700 PSI at your SCVs, you'd remove this cap, install a stroke control valve, and then turn it clockwise all the way in. And when you do that, you're gonna hear the pump kind of get louder, 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 and then like shut off. And when that shuts off, you know you have no oil pressure to it. Now, when you screw it back out, you're gonna hear the hydraulics kick back in, and then you should have 22 to 2400 PSI at your SCVs. Okay, in my case with the planter, what actually happened, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but hey, let's be real, right? The year prior, I must have had the vacuum motors hooked up to a different SCV, and I actually had to move the rod in and out because I couldn't, there's a little plastic knob here that's broken, and I couldn't get the rod to move. Usually they spin clockwise or counterclockwise. In this case, the little plastic handles broke off, and so I had to use a vice grip and some oil, pound it back and forth, try to get it to free up. Eventually I was able to free up. Thank you, Larry, for giving me that tip. And we were able to turn the SCV control. We were able to turn the SCV control clockwise so we get more flow to a vacuum, and I never missed a beat all spring. Hopefully this is helpful in kind of explaining what the stroke control valve actually does to the hydraulic piston pump. So when farmers call you and go, hey, my digger doesn't want to lift out of the ground, because this has happened to me. This is a real conversation me and you have had.
I had several in this fall, yeah.
Yep. It goes back to the difference between that screw right there and the cap. If it has that screw in there, you can get in there with the pliers, a wrench, turn it all the way in, which opens full flow to the pump, flushes everything out, and then you just turn it all the way back out. You don't have to mess with pressure. It's going to be at the same operating pressure. But if that cap's in there, then you got to take that out and put one of these in.
Our 10, 20, 30, 40 series had this. 50 series had the other style with that Allen. Had a 1/2 inch nut on the top.
Okay, and then with the pump, with the castings, you can't put a 50 series in a, okay.
No, the de-stroking screw is that long on this one. It's that long on the 50 series.
Larry gets a number of these calls a year. You know, maybe you're running a loader or something like that. Well, I can run and drive fine, but I just don't have booms just not going up and down like it used to. More than likely it's your stroke control valve. So, and real quick, when if you're Farmer Bob and you're trying to measure that, and let's just use a 4430 or 4020, all you do is you take a gauge that goes somewhere between 2 and 2500 PSI, stick it in the SCV, and watch what it's reading. And what system pressure on 20 and 30 systems was 22.5?
2250 to 2350.
Gotcha. Right there, if you have no hydraulics. So if you have no hydraulics, like you said, if that's sticking, what would the pressure read out of the SCVs?
Probably 1700.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that it's gonna be all zero, it's just gonna be low. And then do you usually see it chatter, the gauge?
You'll see it bouncing because you've got your pressure control valve, like on 20, 30, 40, 50 series, they got a pressure control valve. That maintains priority oil to steering and brakes. And that valve has to get shuttled to 1650 to 1750 before it'll send any oil to the back, to your hydraulic, to your rock shaft, or to your SCVs. So it's got to satisfy the demand for oil to steering and brakes. And on 40-50 series, seatless priority. But anyway, so that's why you'll only get 1700 back there, because it's reading. It's not shuttling that valve, so you're not getting any oil pressure back there.
Gotcha.
Because this isn't building enough pressure to take the pressure control valve off its seat.
Gotcha.
So this will be totally assembled. We'll get this all back together, and then we'll start working on the main pump.
Our good shaft here, and is that just regular grease?
Yeah, just grease to something to hold the needles in.
Hold the needles
place.
in?
Yep.
Gotcha. And then how many of these needles are in here?
36. 36 of them.
So you start putting the puzzle back together like that.
Yep, you just start stuffing them in there till there's no more room, or till you run out of needles. And hopefully the parts guys gave you the right amount.
That's never happened, has it?
I've gotten 35. Fortunately, I stocked just a couple needles, extra needles, just in case.
Yep.
Once this is all reassembled, then we'll start press the bearings back on. And again, on a larger output pump.
And what runs that? Like 50 series? 55,
Yeah,
60?
50, or a 40 series with a hydraulic front drive. They went to a bigger pump on them. This lobe on the shaft, be like a camshaft where it lifts to get a little more lift with those pistons. So it'll have actually a deeper cut on the end of the lobe of the shaft.
And now you just put the washer back on?
That washer, and then this washer. And then we'll press the bearing back on. You don't want to press on the cage of the bearing. The cage of the bearing sticks out. So you put a little washer underneath so you're not pushing on the cage of the bearing.
Have you ever wrecked a bearing before? Have you seen someone else wreck a bearing?
Not really. If you put the spacer under it. And I make sure it spins yet when I'm...
Oh, so she just bottoms out like that.
And there you have it. Just a little bit of play in between here. You can see this moves back and forth just maybe 10-15 thousandths. That's about right. So that's ready to get installed into the main pump. I go through in the overhaul kit and be sure we have 8 piston plugs, O-rings, 8 of these white sheaths. Basically make sure that the kit is complete. There should be 8 of these square packings. 8. I can look in the book exactly, but
No.
it sucks. I think it's an inlet because it's got a suck oil. Yeah, because it's coming from this port, inlet port. So that actually opens this. You look, I don't know if you can see it in here. When I open up that valve, go through here. I don't know if you can see it at all.
Yep, you can see it moving. So if those are tight and those all move freely, then you're good.
Right.
What the problem was with that pump, what you noticed is they were all loose in there, meaning you could actually wiggle them.
Well, they came right out. They're supposed to be press fit. This is what it looks like.
Gotcha. So that's what we're seeing move in here. But the problem was these all fell out.
These were loose in the body, in the pump body itself.
And then in this case, you didn't pull those because in the second pump, they were tight.
They're tight. I don't want to.
You don't want to
loosen them.
Yep. Okay. If they're all tight when you disassemble them, you don't need to pull it apart.
Correct. That's why I grab a hold of each one with a pair of pliers and jerk them to make sure that nothing moves.
Those caps that are going on right now, those just have an O-ring behind them.
Yep. Each one's got an O-ring. These got an O-ring and a sheath. These are just O-ring.
Hey, look at that. Now we get to look at them.
O-ring. And then these, when I disassembled, put them all in order so that they all go into the same hole and going back together. I'm not sure this is as important as it is the pistons.
Okay.
The pistons it'd be like taking a piston out of an engine and putting number 1 in number 6 hole.
Depends how much you like the engine. What's the torque spec?
125.
125?
This thing is this is the actual shaft seal. The other seal, this seal is actually a dust seal. This is the one that has to, the backup ring goes in first. This is the one that has to actually seal anything that decides on the shaft right there. Once it's in the housing, just a quad ring.
And that just sits down there.
Yep. Make sure you get a little twist in it right now.
And you can usually feel them when they're getting bound up, can't you?
Yep.
In that case, it just doesn't even want to
Yeah, we'll go
roll in there. The white poly goes
closest to you.
okay,
It's a backup.
and that black quad ring goes in front. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And this is the dust cap.
Yep, this is the seal.
Give me one sec.
And that you don't want to.
And it goes in backwards like that.
The spring is always to the oil.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then this port here,
Yep.
that's the one that goes to your seal drain line right here.
Oh, okay. That's that little plastic line that sucks.
Yep, the little plastic one.
Yep.
So when you drive this in, you want to make sure you don't drive it too deep. If you drive it too deep, it can't get oil out to here. So you just get it deep enough so that you can get your snap ring back in place.
Do you need to blow air back through that oil line? Has tested if you drove it in too deep, or do you just flush it out?
Once I get it in there, I use the snap ring to seat it.
Okay. So then now you get the snap ring started?
Yep.
Perfect. And then that's how you kind of know it's proper depth.
That, you know, the depth is just right.
Gotcha. And you just drive that in.
Just kind of feel around it. A little bit deeper there. Good. So that's all in there. Okay.
So that just basic grease, wipe it on there just to assemble it. And that's just so there's something in there to lubricate it.
Yeah, an initial start if you're not going to have any oil, so you want to have something that's going to lubricate things.
Now, was that a new bearing or is that the original
That's
bearing?
original bearings.
Okay.
They look good.
And same thing as like the shaft. If the bearing is bad, you're looking for pitting, you're looking for flaking.
Yep.
Gotcha. In a lot of this stuff, visual inspection.
That'll tell you what you got visually. You don't, prior to pulling the pump, you'd run your pressure checks and see what's happening there. But once it's on the bench like this, it just.
Now, those white ones, I see that they got a taper. Do you usually try to do like the cone in? Yep, so it's kind of like flaking out.
It's got to go that way.
Gotcha.
And then when you torque them, they will actually, a lot of times they'll just tear off anyway.
Gotcha. I know it's all second nature to you, but I'm learning. Learning on the fly.
Like I said, it's pretty basic. Once you've done a few of them, it's all just a matter of putting everything together.
Which I understand, but when you haven't done them, you might as well try to climb Mount Everest. You know? Like, no, but this is the thing is, okay, there's no replacement for experience, right? And let's face it, the generation that pulled these apart on a regular basis are less and less in the workforce or place. That's why we're grateful for you. Thank you, Larry. But just saying, it's not commonplace for a lot of farmers or a lot of people to pull, or the hobbyists to pull a hydraulic pump apart and go through it. And then there's just even myself, yes, I've put seals in, yes, I've put O-rings in, but I'm still watching you do all this, just go, and you make this look too smooth. You make it look too smooth.
We ordered all new springs, and for the pistons, it felt like they weren't putting enough pressure, and if you stand them up next to each other.
Oh wow, you can actually see yeah. And now, is that just fatigue over the years?
Yep, just from running in and out thousands of times.
Does the green line on them mean anything? Are they for different pressure?
That I don't know.
Okay. When you get into automatic transmissions, a lot of times they'll identify by like a paint stripe. Blue, like a C6 will have a little vacuum shifter, and it'll be identified by a paint stripe, red, green, yellow, and so I wasn't sure.
So we just put each piston in individually. Slide the piston in, slide the spring inside the piston.
Perfect. So that's the piston.
That's the piston. That's
Flat tap it goes in against that roller. Oh, sure. Wow. It's always been funny because there's so many little motors attached to a motor on a tractor. So then we got the spring, and then we got our cap, and then it is the white poly plastic backed by the O-ring.
You don't have the cam of the pump shaft spun away. Obviously, you got spring pressure against the cap, so you can't thread them in there.
But that shaft at this point should spin pretty freely.
No, right now it won't, because right now I got 4 pistons in. So as it's turning, it's going to try and push these against spring pressure, push the pistons out. Right there now. So you got to turn the pump to get the piston to go in far enough so I can get the plug started. Ooh, we got good pressure on them. I'm glad we replaced the springs before they turned really free. Much freer than it should have, I thought.
And at this point, a lot of these parts are pretty inexpensive, aren't they?
Basically, yeah,
it's one thing if you're doing it yourself in the shop and you can drop the pump out, but
what surprised me, this shaft for this pump used to be about $100. It was $306 now.
so you still look at instructions.
Some of them say 110 right here. Some of them say 125 and some say 110.
And what's the difference between the two? That's just the
don't
torque
know.
spec?
Yep, that's the torque spec.
Gotcha. On these outer caps.
Yep.
Okay, so while Larry's tightening those down, I gotta tell you, the hardest thing in the world to do while filming Larry is trying to get him to slow down, because you can tell he's in go mode. This is, I don't mess with Larry. Don't ask him dumb questions. Don't tell him dumb stories. He's in go mode. The whole time I'm here, he hasn't quit moving, and it's no different than when he's in the shop, man. He just keeps going. So what did you actually set these to?
125.
Got ya. The thing here, you have all steel caps going into all steel casting, knowing they've already been torqued once. If you're trying to figure out if you want to go 110 or 125, that extra 15 pounds is probably just a safety, probably to go a little more. I have had these caps rattle loose in the field, and you'll know it quick because it's a heck of an oil spill. Probably better to err on the side of caution and make sure they're solid, because they're really tough to try to make wrenches to get in there, just the way the casting is, isn't it?
Yes.
So 125,
Okay, we're doing. We're going to replace the springs on those also. Some of these, when we disassembled, I didn't think they had the pressure they normally do. So we're replacing these little springs now. Early and late, if you look, this particular pump had been apart once before. These are the 2 style springs that were available for that. And
Oh, really? So they're drastically different in length.
And they're supposed to still
Have the same spring tension?
I remember when disassembly, I was saying that these didn't pop up like
Yep.
they typically do, and that's the reason why. That's how that's going to go in there, just like that.
And that's the spring tension. That's what you were saying. They should pop out like that, and the prior ones weren't.
The tall ones.
Yep.
I'll just assemble it with the tall spring just to get you an idea. tall springs, typically when you take them apart, that's what they do.
Okay.
They pop out of there on you. With the short springs, they don't.
And when you were disassembling this, you just noticed they weren't
Yeah.
coming back like they should.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just sitting there in that little
They
piston.
there's a little valve on the tip of it. Sits into a seat just like an engine valve seat would. When you drop these in, they always tip off to the sides. So you gotta go like that to get the spring back.
Okay, so that's, yep. That's what you just dropped in, was that little arrow looking thing.
Yep.
All right, let's get it right. What do they actually call that arrow looking thing?
Discharge valve, I think.
Discharge valve, okay. So you're dropping in the discharge valve. So discharge valve, spring, and then any idea what they're calling this collar?
Just a seat.
Seat? Okay. We have the new observer, and he's not looking real impressed with our work.
You're wondering what's going on here.
He's like, you stand at this bench a lot.
All day yesterday, I had
Oh, really? I was gonna ask you, you got a couple things in the bucket there.
2 SCV boxes, brake valve, steering valve. All day yesterday at the bench.
And what is there, 8 of those total?
8 of those, yep.
Perfect.
1 for each piston.
Last one?
Last one. And sometimes if they don't stay down deep enough in there, like a couple of these, peen them over a little bit.
Okay, so you just kind of like, and that little peen, that little hit with the hammer just makes like a little groove that holds them back.
A little dent on the top of the housing, basically.
Sure. So in this case, yep, it's just a little divot, and that just keeps it from bouncing,
From falling out.
falling out. Okay. There you just have your return.
Yep. This one I can go right to oil cooler.
And
This
there's
one
an
I leave
O-
loose. O-ring on each side of the banjo fitting.
Perfect.
And that's going to stay loose so that you can turn it as needed, wherever you need it. Okay, now we pull that back out of the vise and rebuild the head of the pump. Remember before we had the stroke control valve that goes against this,
Yep.
and I just seat it in there. And there it's down.
And that little knob went on top.
And get the little spring. This washer goes on the top, then to go against. There's a shoulder in here. And that's the other thing. Remember when we took that other pump apart? This was threaded almost
All the way in? Yep.
All the way through.
Yep.
This one is sitting out, so that tells me the pump is not worn out.
When I seen that, because this was laying under the shelf or in the shelves in cold storage, because no one remembered. We remembered we had it, but we didn't know what it was out of. That was one of the first things I noticed. I'm like, oh, it's not turned all the way in. Maybe this is a good sign.
Little filter screen that goes in the head of the pump here.
And there was a packing like that on that little screen, wasn't there?
One on the top, one on the bottom, just to seal it. And then that goes all the way down into it, like so. Then you got the little... This has to go in with this up. So you drop it in, and look at that. It came the right way the first time.
Oh, you're good.
Got lucky.
So like that little flat screwdriver head side is
Yep,
up.
that has to go inside of this This spring is going to sit over that. There we put this on. And this one we don't torque. Head's halfway assembled.
There we have the destroking screw going in, and nothing goes in front of the destroking screw.
Nope, once we
'Cause
get
that's
this
already in.
place, once I get this in place, I'll show you how it works. Let's make this up a little bit. If you look, and if you can see into here, that's the tip of that valve.
Yep.
See as it's pushing it off the seat,
Yep.
and that's when you're destroking the main pump. If that valve sticks, it can't tell the pump to pump. So when you manually destroke, this is what you're doing. You're shutting the pump off manually.
Yeah.
So he backs it out all the way. So that's
Crazy.
and basically all you're doing is you're pulling this valve, you're pushing this valve off of its seat. Because if it sticks in this position, it's not going to pump.
And that just flushes it all with oil.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Commonplace when you need to do that, when you need to turn in the destroking screw, what usually happens? Won't shift, you won't have hydraulic pressure.
You'll have steering, but it'll feel kind of lumpy, like your steering is, like you got really thick oil. You run the 3-point, if you got a load on the 3-point, it might chatter. SCV's probably ain't gonna work. So yeah, you'll lose all hydraulic function. Look at that, we're running out of parts. Now I'm gonna flip that back over. There's a thicker and a thinner washer.
Okay.
I wanna put the thicker one on this one. So I'll pull that other plug back out.
And what's the reasoning for it?
Just, that'll give us a little more pressure.
Okay.
It'll basically compress that spring a little further. So zip that back out of there. That's why I didn't like that one.
So, because it's smaller, it's just kind of wedged in there?
Uh-huh. Let's go with this one instead. There we go. Much better. All right. Next step.
And just light layer grease.
Yep, just something to hold this one in because I've got to tip this upside down.
And that's just an O-ring?
O-ring there. 8 square packings.
And are those solid rubber? There's not a lip on the back?
Solid rubber. Then we have our shim pack.
Now, obviously, it had a certain amount of shims when you disassembled it. Do you keep that same amount, or do you add to it?
I start initially with that and see what I get for an end play. We want 4 to 6 thousandths of end play. I'll typically go down, if I have to, I'll go down to 3 actually. Or I'd rather have less end play than more end play in something like this.
When you're checking end play and shim packs like that, what tolerance do you factor in the grease? Because obviously that takes up some space, or do you just kind of...
Not really. It'll
Okay.
Once it's squashed into place, it pretty much stays there. It gets heavier as we keep adding more stuff. While I'm thinking of it, we're gonna put these in the old pump. New O-rings on them.
Just a single O-ring on both of them?
Yep.
There's
just,
not like a polyplacking line or anything?
Nope, just a plain old O-ring. Get that impact on that one. This is when you were talking, you might put an elbow in anyway.
Yep.
All right. Head of pump goes on. Obviously, pump it down.
Have you ever had to put new bolts in? Just reuse them?
Yep.
And they're all the same length?
Yep, these four are the same.
Yeah, yep. And there's no lock washers or anything? They're just...
They get torqued to 85. Make sure shaft turns. You don't have too much shim in there to lock it.
All right, going back to the shim and making sure it turns, how do you actually at this point check end play? Just on the end of the shaft?
Yep.
Okay.
Tip it over and drive the shaft down into the bore. Rest of the way to make sure we seat that bottom bearing race. Now it's heavier yet. Drive the shaft down into the bore. Rest of the way to make sure we seat that bottom bearing race. We should try and get, I suppose, down to 4. If you get too much end play in it, that square packing, remember, in the shaft?
Yep.
If we get too much end play, it allows that shaft to do this and then it eats that square packing. But we've only got 2, and I know the spec is 4 to 6. So I probably should get a little bit more end play.
So now you pull it back apart?
Just pull the head back.
Okay, so back to the shim washers.
Here's the shims. Now we'll get the micrometer out and see what this feels like. A 6. Trying to figure out how I'm going to get, because like I said, the dimensions are only 6s and 10s.
There's not a 2.
Add them up, see what we've got here first. And then we will remove 2 thousandths. That's a 10. Six. And a 6. So we've got 22 thousandths. We got to get 20. 2 10s. Right? Sound right?
Yeah, because so basically what was in there was 22 thousandths, 2 6s.
22.
Yep.
We need to get down to 20
Why do we need to get down to 20?
because we had 22.
Yep. Oh, it's reversed. Oh, that's, yes.
22.
Yep. So 2 10s will give us 20, which would take our end play from 2 thousandths to 4 thousandths.
Yes. It should.
Should. I'll take should. So what is this actually called? A micrometer?
Micrometer, yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's
So-
what measures the thickness of, well, shims obviously, or whatever you're working on, or shaft diameters, and you got different. I've just got my 1-inch peg in here now. You can go 2, 3, or 4-inch peg, depending upon what you got for measurement, what you need to measure.
How many years have you had this?
25, maybe longer.
The wood case is really cool. So you put the 210s in, and now you're just gonna bolt it back down,
210s,
torque it back down.
Tighten it back up and see. It's getting a little heavier. And as they get older, they get heavier.
Yeah, but you're still not letting them win.
Not giving up yet.
You're not telling the kids to get off the yard yet, but they know. They know not to.
About 3, we were about 1.5 before. I'm gonna call that good. Get that all the way seated again. We're at 0. About 3. Perfect. Okay. This fitting is still loose. After once you get your line attached, tighten up that fitting.
It just dawned on me I gotta order a new line. Yeah, she's old.
And it's gonna be the big line, so you gotta get the 2 adapters.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Because it's gonna be a 5/8 line.
Would it be easier at this point just to put new fitting in? Or don't they make a fitting?
I don't think they do. It's an adapter that goes here and then on the transmission bolt.
Gotcha.
R27 140. All those parts fit in the pump.
That's a good thing.
There's nothing left over. A couple O-rings. This kit fits multiple applications.
Sure. I was gonna ask you, it looks like we still got some O-rings left, but.
Yep. This would be on a power shift tractor. They have a big elbow here.
Yep. Oh, we know that elbow well, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And these would have been
Something. Yeah.
different applications. This one is ready to go.
Are you happy it's done?
Yeah.
You want me to leave so you can get going?
No,
The pump's assembled.
you're ready to go.
I know you take this for granted, but there's so many things, like I'm watching you. You're flying around. Seriously, it is fun just to watch him work, because it's the hardest thing in the world to get him to sit still. But there's so many things you're doing, like when we had that seal rollover, that I'm watching just to make sure we can get it kind of right, so someday when you don't answer your phone, like, I can pull this up and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I mean, how did you think? Was that pretty normal? Do they go together that well?
Yep, typically they do that square pack, and that's always a bugger because you have to put the white sheath in there first because there's not room to get it tucked in there afterwards.
Gotcha.
So it has to go in first.
But, okay, if you're Farmer Bob and you're throwing it up on the bench and you're attempting to do this for the first time, John Deere does make a book. It's called the Piston Pump.
Radial piston pump.
Radial piston pump. I think a few aftermarket companies make them too. I think I found mine on eBay. But really, what our goal kind of here with this video was, if you have a manual and you're kind of watching this, we kind of pointed out all the red flags, but between this video and the manual, you should be able to follow it step by step. You know, we might not have been able to cover everything in this video, but for the most part, I know we covered the basics, the highlights, and yeah. Is there anything else that...
My terminology, I mean, discharge and inlet valves might be, I look in the book because I get those confused. I think this is intake and those are discharge, but they could be, I'd have to look in the book exactly. And that, your radial piston pump book will tell you exactly discharge valve or crankcase outlet valve. That's what this one was a crankcase outlet valve. The one that had the screen on it.
Yep.
That's called a crankcase outlet valve. This is stroke control valve. That's called a crankcase outlet valve. This is stroke control valve. Couldn't think of that when I was assembling. I was trying to think what's that one called again? Crankcase outlet. So it just basically drops pressure in the crankcase. This would be considered a crankcase. So as this pump is running, when the tractor's running, this is turning at engine RPM. So this is spinning, it's holding the pistons, it's pushing those pistons out. If there's no demand for oil, you've got oil suction coming in here, pressure going out here. If you're at 2,200 pounds and there's no demand, those 8 pistons in there will stay in the out position. It builds enough hydraulic pressure in the
in the cavity of the main hydraulic pump to hold, they've been built 2,200 pounds, to hold those pistons in the out of stroke position. So they're not doing this anymore. They're just out here. So this shaft is spinning freely. There's no pistons against it when it's at pressure. Once there's a demand, you stroke a hydraulic or you steer it. Those pistons flop back against the shaft and it starts to pump again. But it's a closed center system, so it's always got 2,200 pounds or 2,350, wherever you're set. It's always running that zero flow, but 2,300 pounds.
So, and real quick, if you're Farmer Bob and you're trying to measure that, and let's just use a 4430 or a 4020, all you do is you take a gauge that goes somewhere between 2 and 2,500 PSI, stick it in the SCV, and watch what it's reading. Mm-hmm. And what system pressure on 20 and 30 systems was 22.5?
2250 to 2350.
Gotcha. So right there, if you have no hydraulics, so if you have no hydraulics, like you said, if that's sticking, what would the pressure read out of the SCVs?
Probably 1,600, 1,700.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that's going to be all zero, it's just going to be low. And then do you usually see it chatter, the gauge?
You'll see it bouncing because you've got your pressure control valve, like on 20, 30, 40, 50 series, they got a pressure control valve. That maintains priority oil to steering and brakes. And that valve has to get shuttled to 1650 to 1750 before it'll send any oil to the back, to your hydraulic, to your rock shaft or to your SCVs. So it's got to satisfy the demand for oil to steering and brakes. And on 40-50 series, seatless priority. But anyway, so that's why you'll only get 1,700 back there, because it's reading. It's not shuttling that valve, so you're not getting any oil pressure back there.
Gotcha.
Because this isn't building enough pressure to take the pressure control valve off its seat.
Okay, so once we get the pump back in the tractor to test where your actual pressure's at, the farmer wants to put that gauge in the back in the rear SCV, because that's actually one of the easiest spots to read, isn't it?
Just read it, yeah, just click
Gotcha.
the coupler and call it good.
So if you got the tractor sitting there at 1,500 RPM and the gauge is only saying 1,200 PSI, what would you do?
1,200, then you got more problems.
Okay, then
if it's at 60,
then you sell the tractor. Okay, if it's at 1,800 or 21.
About 18, 19 to basically you're going to crack the 3/4 inch nut here, and then take a 17 or 7/32 Allen screw and screw that in, and that again is going to put more pressure against that spring for that stroke control valve. We keep talking about stroke control valve. That's going to put more pressure against this to hold it to build your pressure. This is the heart of the pump that tells it when to turn on and when to turn off. Your stroke control valve.
So when farmers call you and go, hey, my digger doesn't want to lift out of the ground, because this has happened to me. This is a real conversation me and you have had.
I had several of them this fall. Yeah.
Yep. It goes back to the difference between that screw right there and the cap. If it has that screw in there, you can get in there with the pliers, a wrench, turn it all the way in, which opens full flow to the pump, flushes everything out, and then you just turn it all the way back out. You don't have to mess with pressure. It's going to be at the same operating pressure. Right. But if that cap's in there, then you got to take that out and put one of these in.
10, 20, 30, 40 series had this. 50 series had the other style with that Allen. Had a 1/2 inch nut on the top.
Okay, and then with the pump, with the castings, you can't put a 50 series in a, okay.
No, the destroking screw is that long on this one. It's that long on the 50 series.
Gotcha. Hopefully it cuts down on the phone calls from Farmer Bob, huh?
I like doing this kind of stuff. The bench work, like I said, all day. That's what I did all day yesterday. Was on the bench all day. So.
Can you just imagine if we could find somebody to freaking repair those? Yeah. You'd be in business forever. Larry would be 104 sitting out here.
You're working on them damn things, yeah.
Sipping on Mai Tais. Hanging out with the Tesla robot. Oh, you trained the Tesla robot how to put it together.
If we could get those to fit in there tight. Again. If we could, but I just don't know. I think the only way you'd have to get in with the machine, but you got to be careful because you can't machine too much out. You're going to lose some of the integrity of the housing. And there's no such thing as an oversized valve. So, I don't think anybody has rebuilt those pumps to a point where they can
hold up
one this far.
Yep.
And if a pump gets a lot of metal through it, that's when you'll see your pistons.
If we could get those to fit in there tight.
We had a couple of years at Grenada.
Again.
I mean, there was nothing left.
If we could, but I just don't know.
Yeah. Good thing they got sent away as cores. Just got back from Larry's house. Just got in my driveway. Oh, it's one of those very, very slippery snowstorms, but we got the pump we got the pump sitting here. I got the pump sitting here on the passenger seat floor so it stays dry, and we're gonna go throw it on the bench so we can get it painted and get it put in. But quite the adventure, and a lot of fun. And this pump kind of has gone like a little bit the way the tractor is, a little bit good, a little bit bad, but a lot of fun. I'm just driving down the driveway right now. I'm just getting back from Larry's, and no regrets. Are just kind of happy, forward progress, and once you know it, kind of funny. Hey, we have a bad pump, but oh, look at that, we got some parts. All right, and I was able to grab another pump and make that one work. So I'm gonna bring it in the shop here and get it painted so we can start getting it put back together. And yeah, pretty cool.
All right, so you have a hydraulic pump all reassembled and put back together. How does that feel?
Really good. It's actually one of the final things we're waiting on. Okay, so it's not in the best focus, but if you see the motor there, now that we're getting to the end of this video, we'll give you a little teaser. We're making really good progress. We actually got the pump in the tractor already, and we got this upcoming week, we gotta get our fuel lines, and then we gotta get our hydraulic lines, but we're hoping in the next couple weeks, we'll have a video on, will it start? And if it doesn't start, will Eric be crying in the corner? There's a lot of time, a lot of money involved with all this.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been a heck of a whirlwind here. Yeah, kind of exciting and kind of see it moving forward.
And still, it's been so fun to see everyone that's been coming out of the woodwork to work on it and to help and to see the progress. So it's been really fun.
Yeah, and even friends sending me text messages like, "Hey, seen it? When do you think it's going to have it running?" I'm like, "Hey, hopefully end of January."
Yeah.
And so we're closing up on that point. And like I said, it's one way or another, we're going to hear it fire. Just what happens after that will kind of depend on how good a shape that bus motor was.
Yeah, exactly.